So we'll be talking the interaction between caste and gender in four major dimensions. First is endogamy. The second is the idea of chastity of women. The third is inequality between man and woman. And the last is honor and violence. So whenever you are supposed to discuss caste and gender, use these four major dimensions. So let's talk about the first dimension, that is endogamy. So we all know that caste as an institution basically is based on primarily one particular aspect, that is endogamy. So if there is intercaste marriage going on, caste as an institution will fail or it will collapse. And that's why endogamy is the most important aspect of caste. We have seen like scholars like Ambedkar, Lohia, various other scholars, they have talked about endogamy being the most important aspect of caste. Now, endogamy, the burden of which actually falls upon women. Leela Dubey says that women are seen as gateway to caste. So gateway to caste means the ones who are actually at the boundaries of the caste, and they are supposed to maintain the purity of the lineage. They are supposed to maintain the purity of that particular caste. And that's why endogamy. Now, restrictions, these practice of endogamy will put restrictions on sexuality of women. What is this restriction? That means women are not allowed to choose their partners. They basically they have restrictions on choice of partners. A lot of restrictions on the women. Now, this restriction can be enforced by two ways. One is either by ideology. So ideology, like they are trained. So the idea of Stri Dharma, the idea of purity of the caste, the honor, and all such kind of thing. Or second is through coercion. Now, coercion in the sense that maybe by some kind of violent activities or honor killing, they will be forced to behave in a particular manner. Okay, so that is the endogamy and how it leads to suppression of the woman. If you remember, Ambedkar talks about endogamy leads, or endogamy is concerned with one specific kind of problem, the problem of maintenance of numbers, and how surplus of women are managed. That is the practice of sati, prohibition of widow remarriage, okay, or polygyny. That is again restrictions on women. Whereas in case of surplus of men, they are not suppressed just like the women. In case of surplus of men, the problem is managed by child marriage of the girls, creating a greater pool of girls available for the marriage. So this is the first aspect, that endogamy restricts sexuality of the woman. Now, second comes the chastity of women. Chastity means the dignity, the purity of the woman. Now, coming from an upper caste, the women are expected to be, that is, follow strict virginity complex, so you must have heard about certain practices in societies like Haryana, it's very common. That is, after the marriage, the couple are supposed to bring in front of the parents the stained bed sheet, and that is the strict virginity complex. And if the female does not have bleeding during the time of intercourse, then, or she is not a virgin, that can call for abolition or say breakdown of the marriage, and the panchayat will allow for it. Okay, that is the stained blood sheet. So that is strict virginity complex. Second, loyalty to husband. And third, that is pativrata, or the third is celibacy in widowhood. So this is expectation from the women of upper caste. Whereas you will find that lower caste women are not expected to behave in such a manner. That is, there is no virginity complex, no strict virginity complex. Now you will understand that ये women को liberate नहीं कर रहा, but in a way it is again suppressing women. How? And second, they are not expected to be loyal to husband, or they are not expected to follow celibacy during widowhood, or say can go for divorce or remarriage and so on and so forth. Now, how does it actually suppresses a woman? जब इतनी strict virginity complex नहीं है, it actually gives the license to upper caste men to sexually exploit the lower caste women. Okay, because they are not expected to be as pure, they are not expected to maintain that kind of boundary with the upper caste men, and that's why upper caste men have the license to exploit the lower caste women. That is the idea of chastity. Okay, next is basically an idea that Leela Dubey says ये chastity का maintenance, the honor or purity of caste की maintenance की जो burden है, that is on the shoulder of the women, and that's why they are very much cautious with respect to what diet that they consume, because they have to enter into the temple, they have to enter into, say आप men के केस में आप देखोगे कि men का जैसे सुबह एक बार मंदिर चला गया या पूजा पाठ कर लिया, तो they will not follow any strict diet practice, maybe दिन में ये नहीं खाना वो नहीं खाना, but women, they are supposed to enter into the temple multiple times in the day, they are supposed to enter into the kitchen multiple times a day, and that's why they will follow a strict dietary regime throughout the day. Okay, so what do they ingest, what kind of food is prepared, and how and by what means the food is distributed in the household, that is basically upon the woman to make sure कि कब किस दिन क्या बनेगा, क्या खाया जाएगा, कौन किस टाइम पे क्या खा रहा है, और what should not be eaten, that is whole soul taken care by the women. Next comes the idea of inequality between man and woman. यहाँ पे लीला दुबे gives a very interesting comparison between man and woman of upper and lower caste. So let's see. The comparison between man and woman of upper caste. So first, Leela Dubey says that there are two types of pollution. One is bodily pollution, and the second is work pollution. That is, bodily pollution means there is something in your body that actually pollutes you. The second is like some kind of activities that you do that will pollute you. Now, do man have bodily pollution? No. Women have it because of menstruation. They are considered to be polluted during that particular time period. Men do not have any such kind of pollution. Do man engage in the act of pollution? That is in the case of upper caste. क्या झाड़ू पोछा सफाई या इस टाइप का कोई काम करते हैं? No. And that's why they do not have any kind of work pollution as well. But women, since they are engaged in cleaning the household, they are engaged in washing the clothes, cleaning the utensils, all such kind of polluting acts, they suffer from work pollution. Now let's see this in the case of lower caste. Now in case of lower caste, do men suffer from bodily pollution? No, but women do suffer. But work pollution is of both man and the woman. They both engage in some kind of act which is considered to be polluting in nature. And that's why Leela Dubey says that because of these factors, women in the lower caste are less unequal to man as compared to women of the upper caste. So there is greater inequality between man and women. आप समझ रहे हो यहाँ पे क्यों? क्योंकि men, they do not suffer from any kind of pollution, whereas in this case men suffer from same kind of pollution, that is work pollution, as compared to the women, and hence there is a greater inequality in case of man and woman of upper caste compared to inequality between man and woman of lower caste. You will also see that this inequality is also less because women contribute to economy of the family in the lower caste. So they will be engaged in some kind of occupation and they will be earning some amount of money. They will be contributing to the economy of the family. And आपके case में you can see the examples in the nearby areas also. So आपके यहाँ पे जितने भी the maids are coming, they definitely will be from the lower caste, and they basically are contributing to the economy of the family, and that's why there is less amount of inequality. अब linking this with the idea of chastity, you will find that लीला दुबे ने बोला कि women of upper caste, they are confined mainly to the familial matters or say familial domain. That means they are not allowed to go outside. They are not allowed to say basically interact with the say external institution, but will be confined only in the domestic household. Say just to give you an example in my area, so there is a community that is Marwadis. So they are Baniyas although, but they are relatively higher caste. They are very rich, wealthy, and many of my Marwadi friends who used to read in my school, their mothers never used to come for parents-teacher meeting. Okay. Moreover, you will find we used to find that they will never come out of their house and go to the market for shopping. Usually, they have a big house. वहाँ से गाड़ी में बैठेंगे, and if they want to buy something, they'll be going to the nearby district, buying something, getting back to the district directly into the house. But it will never happen that you will see any Marwadi woman, definitely from some households which are super rich, so walking on the road ever. It will never happen like this. Although it's not that कि इतने ज़्यादा rich हैं कि उनके लिए चलना is like उनके लिए humiliating. It's not like that. But it's just that कि they have high understanding of chastity, purity, and they feel that कि lower caste के साथ interact करना and the woman going outside and interacting with the people, it's not worth it. Okay, and that's why in order to maintain the honor, they will confine their women only in the spheres of domestic household activities. Okay, so this is the inequality between man and woman. Now, extending this idea, it is called as, I think हम लोगों ने सोशल स्ट्रैटिफिकेशन में ये देखा है, जेंडर बेस्ड स्ट्रैटिफिकेशन में पेट्रियार्कल bargaining. Now, what is this patriarchal bargaining? So, in a patriarchal society, in a patriarchal institutions like caste, what actually happens? Women themselves become the agent of patriarchy, and that is what is called as patriarchal bargaining. Here, in order to get respect or some kind of symbolic or material benefits, women become the agents of patriarchy, because the caste as an institution being patriarchal sets the idea of an ideal woman, how a traditional respectable woman should behave. And that is why women become more rigid about the caste norms. Women become more rigid about the patriarchal norms that is imposed because of the caste honor. Okay, so most of us will accept this fact that the values of patriarchy have been taught to us not by our father, but mainly by our mothers. Because caste as an institution has set up the idea of a traditional or say respectable woman. And in order to get that respect, maybe in the form of some symbolic respect, maybe in the form of some kind of material respect, that is material benefits, women themselves become agent. आपने movie देखी है NH10. So in that also you will see the one who ordered for honor killing was not a man, but जो उस गांव की मुखिया थी, that was a woman who was more concerned about the honor of the caste. Okay, and this is not once in a blue moon wala example. It's a very general case in which women are much severely strict about the caste norms. Why? Because it helps them gain respect in those patriarchal society. They become the agents of patriarchy, which is called as patriarchal bargaining. And then क्या इस patriarchal bargaining से they can become the supreme leader? No. The answer is in the concept called as glass ceiling effect. That despite being the agents of patriarchy, they will never be able to occupy the topmost position. They will always be obstructed by some kind of an invisible ceiling, that is glass ceiling. Unki growth, unki rise, unki supremacy is restricted by male dominance. So no matter whatever they do, they will never be able to lead a caste. There is an invisible ceiling on the rise of women. That is what is called as the glass ceiling effect. Okay. Next comes the last idea. Honor and violence. So the most important aspect related to caste is the concept of honor. And honor basically lies in two ways, or say it's protected in two ways. Basically, male honor lies in control of female body, and female's honor lies in basically maintaining the purity of caste. Now, the concept of honor is so strict or so important that any kind of violation will eventually lead to violence. So there is a scholar, Surinder Jodhka, is a very prominent professor in JNU. He talks about the concept of honor and violence. He says that upper caste usually exploit the women of lower caste because it's a challenge to manhood of lower caste. एक कम्युनिटी जो पेट्रियार्कल सोसाइटी है उसमें सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट या सबसे सिवियर काइंड ऑफ ह्यूमिलिएशन क्या हो सकता है? That is when the women are exploited and the men can do nothing. Okay, that's a challenge to the manhood of that society. Say, for example, if you see any kind of wars are happening, जब भी जो patriarchal societies में, you will find what is the most prized possession, or say what we call as the booties of war. It's usually the women who will be transformed into sex slaves, and that's why it's a biggest challenge to the manhood of the loser community. And caste में भी ये चीज दिखती है when the upper caste will be exploiting the women of the lower caste, and the men of the lower caste can do nothing. Now you can see these things are happening very say मतलब आपकी movies वगैरह में जो 90s या 80s की movies थी जहाँ पे जमींदार और say the peasant community का interaction दिखाया जाता था, you will find that this was a very common scene or very common narrative that was created, in which the so-called Thakur Saab will always be trying to sexually exploit the lower caste women, and उसमें से कोई ना कोई protagonist होगा, and that might be revolting, and finally happy ending होती थी movie की. But this was a very common incident, and this is what Surinder Jodhka is talking about. That is, it gives license to the upper caste to exploit the lower caste women, and manhood of lower caste is being challenged or being humiliated. Now let me give you some examples in India that are very infamous. One is the case of, you must have heard about this, Bhavari Devi case. 90s की बात है. So she belonged to Kumhar community and she was a Sathin. Sathin is something, a kind of government activist या government आशा वर्कर जैसे status था. So under government of Rajasthan का एक women development project था, and Sathin was supposed to improvise specifically the status of women, and इनका एक काम था कि ये child marriage को रोकना चाहती थी. So she was living in a village that was Gurjar dominated, and वहाँ पे 1-year-old girl was supposed to be married, and she actually asked local SP and all. वो marriage को उस दिन तो रोक दिया गया, but अगले दिन से 2 बजे रात में वो शादी चुपके चुपके कर दी गई. Now, since she was able to stop the marriage on that auspicious day, Akha Teej ka din tha, and that's when the marriage was supposed to be organized but could not happen because of her intervention. What actually happened, that it is said that the Gurjar men, they gang raped her. And finally, इनके ऊपर जब ये सुप्रीम कोर्ट में केस गया तो एक पर्टिकुलर गाइडलाइंस, यू मस्ट हैव हर्ड अबाउट इट, विशाखा गाइडलाइंस वाज बेसिकली ऑन दिस केस ओनली, भवरी देवी केस. अभी रिसेंटली उनका इंटरव्यू आया था, आप देख सकते हो, प्रिंट पे पब्लिश भी हुआ है, प्रिंट के यूट्यूब चैनल पे वो इंटरव्यू भी है, in which she was talking about कि जिसके लिए उन्होंने ये काम किया, that is the girl who was 1 year old, and she also hates her because she has been fed that ki her father actually went to jail because of this woman. Now that girl particularly is approximately 40 years old, she has 2 children, and she says that she had to face a lot of marital struggle because this woman interfered in her marriage. Okay, and she says that कि उसमें कोई बुराई नहीं है कि मैरिज वगैरह चाइल्ड मैरिज हो जाए, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. Okay, now Bhavri Devi case, one very infamous case is that of Maharashtra, Kherlanji case. Now in this Kherlanji case, what actually happened, that there was a Dalit family. So mother, father, 2 children, and they were actually owning a land, piece of land, and that piece of land was requested by the local villagers, that is the dominant caste, mainly Kunbi Marathas, for making road, which they refused. And eventually, just because of their refusal, Maratha said that कि ये Dalit community के हैं और हमारी बात नहीं मान रहे हैं. And eventually, what happened, that the girl and that is the woman and her daughter, they were paraded naked in the village. They were gang raped, and finally the body was hanged in the village. Okay, along with the father and the son, the 4 of the family. The family is Bhoot Mange family. So you can see this case, Kharlanji case, very recently Hathras case, and बहुत सारे और भी cases जो अभी मथुरा में हुआ, that is the Dalit woman. So all such cases show that women suffer because of 2 factors. One being a woman, and second, here in this case, being a Dalit woman. Okay, so that is what is called as intersectionality. So here, that is honor and violence, they are correlated to each other. अब सुरेंद्र जोतका ने एक ऑल्टरनेटिव केस भी बताया, एक उल्टा आइडिया. He says that how this idea of honor of women is basically related to caste, because in certain societies where Dalits, they have been free from the dependency on the upper caste, मतलब वो empower हो गए when they got some land, when they got some jobs, when they are economically empowered, politically empowered. वहां पे what these empowered Dalits do, they do the same thing to the upper caste women as their women were facing when they were dependent on the upper caste. So they would be teasing, or they would be, say, acts of eve teasing actually have increased, wherein the Dalit men, they have started eve teasing the upper caste women. At the same time, these Dalit men, they have started to put up restrictions on their own women. Okay, so they have started to reverse this equation, wherein the women in the Dalit community, they are facing more restrictions. They're not allowed to come out of the house. They're not allowed to interact with the men. At the same time, they are teasing or doing this, giving the women of upper caste the same treatment as their women were facing when they were dependent on the upper caste. Okay,